Hello, and welcome to what is episode 28 of A Book or Two to Review. And it's the first time ever I am reviewing two books. And there's a reason I'm doing a double take, because one is the Naval Staff Appreciation, edited by William Schliehauf, additional text by Stephen McLaughlin, and is the actual text put forward by the Naval Staff officially as their appreciation of Jutland. So it's the official. Here is the Jutland Scandal, which is written by Vice-Admiral John Harper and Vice-Admiral Reginald Bacon, which is The Truth About Jutland, which is Harper's original staff review, which was buried on the orders of Beatty, and The Scandal as looked at by Sir Reginald Bacon. What's interesting about this book is, and I find particularly interesting, is that it has a list of things in the plate section. A list of illustrations. I just imagine. Ow. Also, one of the things I find in it, and this is my bugbear with books, I like colour photos. I understand you can't have colour photos unless you colourize them, which is, I understand, not right for a history book. However, when you're taking a modern photo of a ship which has been preserved, you are positively deciding to make that colour photo black and white. I think these books should always be bought as a pair because, to my mind, this tells the story as Beatty and many of the officers, like Chatfield, would have liked it to be. This tells the story, the history, as close as it was, but also it's still tinged with a very much a view of there is a science and things should be done perfectly. The reality is something in between, but what I find most interesting about them is they create a huge furor and a huge fight. And yet, within a decade, probably by 1928, the Royal Navy is convinced Jutland will never happen again, and this fight is still continuing on, but the Royal Navy's paying it no heed. It's completely moved past it. The fight lasts longer than, in many ways, the relevance of the battle. Or rather, the relevance of the battle as we focus on. And the relevance of the battle which caused the fight, the argument. It's all to do with the positioning of the T, the crossing of the T, and, Jellicoe's orders and why the battle cruisers, etc., were sunk, and all those things. The battle cruisers, broadly speaking, were sunk because they found themselves in a stand-up battle which they weren't really supposed to be in. The whole point of a battle cruiser was it was supposed to be fast enough to avoid duking it out with battleships. Or even other battle cruisers if it so chose. That it could use its speeds to set the terms and angles of engagement and therefore choose the best point to attack for itself. This again leads back to my big view of my big mistake that Fisher makes is calling them battle cruisers, not frigates. I think he should have reinstated them and called them frigates. Goodness knows what frigates in Model 1 would have been called at that point and what our modern escort force would be comprised of. Brigs. We would have a fleet of destroyers and brigs. Or sloops of war? Brig sloops? Barks? Swans? Who knows? That's completely off topic. But both of them are worth reading, but you read them together. to get a full view. That's what you should do. For example, contact between battle fleet and battlecruiser force. It was at 6:19 p.m. when the defense disappeared in a cloud of flame and spray and smoke, and the fleet had already begun to deploy at 6:15 p.m. But here it is necessary to retrace our steps and review the information on which the Commander-in-Chief action was based. As the enemy's battle fleet approached, it was of the utmost importance for the Commander-in-Chief to get reliable information and bearing of it as soon as possible, a point emphasized in the ground fleet battle orders, which also laid special stress on the importance of visual contact in the view of the possibility of errors in reckoning arising in wireless reports. The best position in keeping in touch with the enemy battle fleet was astern of the 5th Battle Squadron, and this position was taken up by the Southampton. She hung doggedly onto the enemy under fire, and though her reports were somewhat marred by mistakes and discrepancies in reckoning, they showed that she had a clear conception of her task and did her best to fulfill it. But wireless reports alone were not sufficient. A visual chain had to be established as rapidly as possible. But though the importance of visual touch had found recognition in print, it is clear that it had not received sufficient attention in practice. It is legitimate to assume that the enormous development of an extension of wireless had induced the neglect of the tactical importance of this aspect of visual signalling. The Falmouth and the Black Prince were in touch at 5:33 p.m., but the former was some 9 miles ahead of Southampton, and probably not in visual touch with her, and the latter was some 13 miles from the Iron Duke and not in visual touch. The 5th Battle Squadron had been sighted in the enemy's sight of the enemy's battle fleet, and might well have made a report, when it was lost to sight at about 5:25 p.m. Byron's wireless was out of action, and the Malaya, silhouetted a clear horizon, against the clear horizon, had received heavy punishment. But the Valiant certainly was in position to make a report, and the fact that not a single report was sent in by 5th Battle Squadron, which was the squadron nearest the enemy, clearly shows that its importance to the Commander-in-Chief had not been sufficiently appreciated. You notice what it misses there? Any mention of BT, who is, of course, the commander of the force. So, very interesting. I am very interested at this point. I am going to go to this. I want to find in this book where the next point is, where that point is. And for that, I have to first find the right chapter. And I'm going to presume it's chapter 5, the meeting of the fleets. 31. Now, before anyone sits there and goes, Alex, you've read these books surely before, you know where this is. I do. And I've even looked this up before. But the fact is, and it's important to remember, that if I don't show you how I do it, then I'm not sharing my skills, am I? So, as you noticed, this was contact between battle fleet and battle cruiser force was at 6:19 p.m. it started. Now, here is this. And in this book, you find it in page 32. The Commander-in-Chief is in need of information. If, therefore, Jellicoe was to get the best use of his superior gun armament, and of any disadvantage due to the enemy's superior torpedo armament, it was desirable to deploy outside a range of 15,000 yards from the enemy battlefleet. To enable him to do this, timely and accurate information of the possible position and course of the enemy was all important. But unfortunately, this was the very thing denied to the Commander-in-Chief. A ship in visual touch with the enemy, but out of sight of her flagship, must, in reporting the enemy's position, also give her own geographical position, by latitude and longitude. The accuracy with which the Commander-in-Chief can determine the relative bearing and distance from him or the enemy will depend upon the accuracy with which the geographical positions of his flagship and the ship making the report are known. In the cloudy weather usually prevailing in the North Sea, especially when course and speed have to be continually altered in the presence of the enemy, it is too much to expect that any ship would know her geographical position with absolute accuracy. Small errors, some one way and some another, are usually cancelled if several reports are received. Hence the necessity of continuous and reliable reports. The first definite information of the presence of the enemy battle fleet, which had reached Jellicoe, was sent by the Southampton at 4:38, which read, "Have sighted enemy battle fleet bearing approximately southeast, course of enemy north. My position, latitude 56 degrees 34 north, longitude 6 degrees 20 east, 1638." Several reports had, however, previously been received in the Iron Duke, giving the position of the enemy battlecruisers. Owing, however, to signalling or ciphering errors, also owing to the unavoidable errors in the dead reckoning of the ships concerned, the position of the enemy relative to the Iron Duke must have been, to say at least, conjectural. Between the time of sighting enemy battle fleet and the time visual contact had been made between our advance force and our battle fleet, Jellicoe received 4 messages from Southampton, 1 message from the Champion, which contained information that was obviously inaccurate, and 1 message from Lion, which was sent at 4:45 p.m. This 1 message sent from Lion was, unfortunately, mutilated in transmission. It should have read, "Have sighted enemy's battle fleet bearing southeast." Owing to the Lion's wireless having been shot away, the message had to be passed through the battlecruiser Princess Royal, which caused some delay, and when it was received by Jellicoe 20 minutes later, it read, "26 to 30 battleships, probably hostile, bearing south-southeast, steering southeast." During the hour preceding the time at which visual contact was made, a period during which it was all important for Jellicoe to receive accurate information, no ship of the advance forces, except Southampton, sent any message. This was partly due to the battlecruisers having lost touch with the enemy battle fleet during the run north. The 5th Battle Squadron was, however, still in touch. In fact, 2 of these battleships were engaged in a gunnery duel with the leading German battleships, and authentic reports of the position of the enemy could have been sent at regular intervals. But no report was sent from this source. The vital importance of sending continuous information appears to have been appreciated only by the Southampton. Under the circumstances, therefore, it is not surprising that Jellicoe was uncertain as to the bearing of which the enemy should be sighted. In his dispatch, he states it was apparent on the meeting that the reckoning of the battlecruiser fleet was about 12 miles to the eastward of Iron Duke's reckoning. In consequence of this, enemy was sighted on the starboard bow instead of ahead, and some 20 minutes earlier than was anticipated. The difference in reckoning on meeting between the Iron Duke and Lion was in reality about 10 miles. The Iron Duke was about some 4 miles to the southeast of her reckoning, and the Lion was about 6 miles to the westward. Jellicoe would not, however, have formed his opinion entirely on the only message received by wireless from the Lion. After the enemy battle fleet was sighted, in the messages sent from Southampton, in which a position is given, that sent at 4:38 p.m. was 13 miles to the eastward of her correct position, and those at 4:45 p.m. and 4:48 p.m. were 6 and 9 miles, respectively. These errors, if due to dead reckoning, should have been nearly constant. It is probable, therefore, that they were partly due to the other causes mentioned. Jellicoe continues, owing to the uncertainty as to the position of the enemy battle fleet, it had not been possible to redispose the guides of the columns on any different bearing. Consequently, the deployment was carried out under some disadvantage, and indeed it was not easy to determine the correct direction of deployment until the battle fleets were almost in contact. We see, therefore, that although the rival battle fleets were rapidly closing one another, and although not in sight, were getting close to gun range, Jellicoe had no reliable information on which to deploy. If he deployed on such scanty information, he might give the enemy a great advantage, and again if he waited for more news. He might find himself within gun and torpedo range without his fleet being deployed. In an endeavour to obtain some reliable information as to the whereabouts of the enemy fleet, Jellicoe made a visual signal to Beatty at 6:10 p.m. "Where is the enemy battle fleet?" After waiting for some minutes about 6:01 p.m. "Where is the enemy battle fleet?" After waiting for some minutes without seeing any reply, a repetition of the signal was made at 6:10 p.m. and at 6:14. The reply was received: "Have sighted enemy's battle fleet bearing south-southwest." What in there is that damning of Beatty? Nothing. It just mentions that none of them do their jobs, including Beatty. But this is the point. Beatty was a product of his time. I know. I sit somewhere between probably Andrew Lambert and Drakenfell on this. Although I can bash Beatty just as well as Drakenfell can. Beatty should have been a very good First Sea Lord, and often I hold him more accountable for his issues as First Sea Lord than his issues as commander of the battlecruiser force, because honestly, he shouldn't have been in charge of the battlecruiser force. As dashing and as much elan as he has, Give him an independent command. Give him the battle cruisers hunting down surface raiders. Any of those things. That's fine. He's great for that. He's not going to face much opposition. It's not going to be that organized, and overwhelming firepower can cover up for any mistakes. But the trouble is, for the battlecruiser force, you need an officer who's going to impress on every level his duties. And here is the thing. Thomas of 5th Battle Squadron has come from the Grand Fleet. In the Grand Fleet, you're with the Commander-in-Chief. The odds are, if the enemy are close enough to the Commander-in-Chief, he will know before you do. So you don't really need to think about reporting it to him. You should understand that, but he's new to the battlecruiser force. The person who should have been emphasizing that everyone needs to be communicating when we're in range of the enemy is the force commander. Because I'm sorry, the buck does stop with you when you're in charge. This is a revolutionary concept sometimes, but it does. Which means the buck stops with BT. You hear the story about Admiral King and BT, and King being upset with basically unimpressed with BT because BT counts as an exercise because he's losing. Publishing this post-World War I would not have been a damning indictment. Well, though there are parts which are far worse for him in there, it wouldn't have ruined him. It would have said, I'm strong enough to have an accurate appraisal of my work. But this is the final thing, because this is what has to be produced to assuage his ego. This is why, for me, BT should never have been in the post he was, because fundamentally, it's a weakness to be so focused and worried about what people think of you, and to put all the blame on an officer who you selected for the post who didn't have the proper training and shouldn't have been there. Because here's the other option. BT could have had a guy called Somerville as his communications officer. One of the best in the fleet, one of the best trained. But no, he chooses Seymour, and Somerville goes to Gallipoli, to the Eastern Mediterranean. Good for them there. They have a great staff officer and signals officer. Terrible. Absolutely atrocious for BT. Because what is the most important communications person in the entire fleet? BT's. Who's not only responsible for the communications of his admiral, but is also the one who sets the standards for the communications of all the other officers there, and all the other communication officers on ships. And it's the one who could have gone round to all the air signalers and gone, look, doesn't matter if your captain tells you to or not. The moment we're in range, you tell if we see the enemy, you tell the commander-in-chief. You signal it back to the to Admiralty. You do whatever's necessary, but you get the signals out there. There are multiple levels at which a navy works and standards are set. And honestly, the most glaring deficiency in the Battle of Jutland is communication. You fix that one thing, and the battle turns out incredibly differently. Because if there had been communication, the Germans run into a trap. They run into the massed firepower of the Grand Fleet, fully deployed, both times. And the losses they suffer, because they get enough damage as it is, especially thanks to the second time, but if they get that repeated at the first time, is immense. So it all comes down to communication. Who'd have thought? Logistics and communication. Critical things for war. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Links to both books are down below. Take care.